I want to tell you about the smell. That's the thing that stays with you, you know? After the screams have faded into the static chorus, after the light of the astronomicon guttered and died in your mind, it's the smell. It's not the coppery tang of blood, or the acrid sting of promethium, or the ozone of a plasma reactor. Those are the smells of our war. The smells we made. This was a different war. A hungrier one. It was the smell of a world rotting while it still breathed. A sweet, cloying perfume of blooming fungi and dissolving rock, of digestive vapors, and a billion trillion chitinous bodies rubbing together. A scent of industry that was also the scent of consumption. It was the smell of the hive. And it was the first herald. The first love letter from a galaxy that had found us, and found us delicious. Listen to me. My name was Revis of the Xiith, a son of Gilliman, a ultramarine. I held the line at Kolth. I saw the sky fall and the world burn. I thought I had seen the absolute apex of horror, the final, polished shape of betrayal. I was a child. What came for us during our civil war, what descended upon our broken empires while brother strangled brother, it did not care for our allegiances. It did not recognize our heresies. It only recognized biomass. This is not a war story. This is an autopsy of a galaxy. And I am the last scrap of evidence, whispering into the void before the dark finally takes me. My last post was the agri-world of Viridian Fructus, the jewel of the Pharos. A breadbasket for the 500 worlds. A place of order, of logic, of plenty. When the Heresy tore the Imperium in two, we became a strategic linchpin. Gilliman needed us fed, the traitors wanted us starved. Our duty was simple: hold, produce, endure. Our normal was a cycle of paranoia and prayer. The skies were patrolled by ships painted in the livery of a dozen legions, all ostensibly loyal, but you never knew. A look could kill. A whispered rumor could see a whole squad executed. We built fortifications not just against the outside, but against the inside. The chaplains preached of the Emperor's light, but a colder, darker truth was settling in our bones. We were alone. The first change was so subtle, we dismissed it as stress, as the collective psychosis of a civilization eating itself. The astropaths, they called it the static. A faint, psychic fuzz at the edge of all their broadcasts. A sense of something vast, moving in the spaces between stars. They said it felt like a pressure, a migraine brewing in the heart of the galaxy. Messages took longer to arrive. They were distorted, filled with strange harmonics, a chittering, like a billion insects, gnawing at the meaning of the words. Then came the disappearances. Not of soldiers. Not from attacks we understood. But outlying farming communes. Silent. Just gone. No signs of battle. No wreckage. The soil, they said, was different. Richer. Blacker. And it moved if you stared at it too long, crawling with microscopic life that shouldn't have been there. Our tech priests detected anomalous gravitational readings from the system's edge. They spoke of a shadow in the warp, a phrase that chilled me more than heresy ever could. Heresy was a human sin. This was alien. Utterly, irrevocably alien. Our daily rituals shifted. It was no longer just about checking your bolt gun's charge pack. It was about scanning the soil you walked on. It was about listening to the wind for a sound that wasn't the wind. It was about looking at your battle brothers and wondering if the slight gloss in their eyes was fatigue or something else, something being poured into them from that distant, gnawing static. We started calling it the Great Silence, this new enemy. A stupid name. It wasn't silent at all. If you stood on the battlements at night, when the world was still, you could hear it. A low, subsonic hum that vibrated in your teeth, in the marrow of your bones. The planet itself was beginning to sing a new song. And we were all learning the lyrics, whether we wanted to or not. I remember standing watch with Brother Caius, a veteran of 100 compliances. His face was a granite mask of imperial resolve. But that night, he looked young. Afraid. "Revis," he said, his voice barely a breath. "Do you hear it?" The clicking. I listened. Beyond the hum, there was something else. A precise, rhythmic click-clack-click, like stones being knocked together, or like claws on rock. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "It's the wind in the geysers, brother," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the first crack in the foundation of our reality. No, he whispered. The wind doesn't have a rhythm. This has a purpose. That was the last night I remember feeling anything resembling a former life. The last night the horror was something outside of us. The next morning, the sky fell. And it was not made of fire and metal. It was made of flesh. It began not with explosions, but with a rain. A gentle, crimson rain that stained our blue and white armor pink. We looked up, expecting to see storm clouds. What we saw were living vessels, vast and grotesque, blotting out the sun. They were not ships. They were organisms, dripping amniotic fluids and spores, their surfaces crawling with a nightmarish symbiosis of flesh, chitin, and weaponry. They fell upon the planet not as invaders, but as an infection. They didn't land. They impacted. They slammed into the crust, and from their ruptured bodies, the true horror spilled forth. A tide. A living, shrieking, clicking tide of claws and teeth and mindless, perfect hunger. This was the escalation. The moment our civil war became a footnote. The first wave were gaunts. A seething, endless river of them. They washed over our forward defenses not with tactics, but with sheer, overwhelming mass. Our bolters roared, cutting swathes through them, but the swathes closed in seconds. They were a fluid, a wave of fangs and talons. They didn't scream in rage or pain. They made a sound, a constant, brain-scrambling chitter. A sound of consumption. I saw a world eater, a berserker lost in the nails, charge into the horde. He was a whirlwind of chain-axe fury, a god of close-quarters slaughter. For a moment, he carved a mountain of alien dead, and then the tide simply flowed over him. There was no epic duel, no final stand. One moment he was a warrior of legend, the next he was a red stain being absorbed into the swarm. The hive mind did not care for his glory, his rage, his heresy. It only saw protein. That was the first lesson they taught us. Your individuality is irrelevant. The second lesson came from the sky. Winged creatures, like living fighter craft, swooped down, spitting living ammunition that burrowed into our armor. Biocannons on the horizon vomited corrosive plasma that melted ceramite like wax. We were facing an army with every weapon we possessed, and 1,000 we could never have conceived of, all grown, not built. And the smell? Gods of Terra, the smell. It was everywhere. That sweet, rotting stench, now mixed with the acid tang of bioplasma and the coppery scent of our own blood. It coated the back of your throat. You tasted it with every breath. It became the flavor of our new reality. Our carefully laid battle lines, designed to counter Traitor Legion tactics, were useless. This enemy had no flanks. It had no rear. It was a 360-degree, multi-layered nightmare. They came from above, from below, burrowing up through the ground itself. We lost an entire company to a sinkhole that wasn't a sinkhole. It was a massive maw, lined with teeth, that opened up beneath them and closed again, leaving only perfectly smooth, damp earth. Betrayal took on a new, more intimate form. I saw a blood angel, his face a mask of despair, standing over the body of his sergeant. The sergeant was changing. His body was bloating, his armor cracking as new. Chitinous limbs punched their way out from within. A spore, perhaps from a meiotic, had infected him. The living blood angel didn't hesitate. He raised his bolt pistol, his hand shaking, and put a round through his brother's mutated skull. For the Emperor, he whispered, the words hollow. But the body didn't stop moving. It twitched, and from the wound, a swarm of tiny, spider-like creatures poured forth, skittering towards him. He didn't even have time to scream before they were on him, covering him, reducing him to a screaming, writhing mound that was swiftly silenced. The hive was turning our dead, our very fallen, against us. Our rituals of recovery, of honoring the dead, became a death sentence. Every corpse was a potential time bomb. Every drop of blood, a possible contagion. The static in our minds was no longer static. It was a presence. A cold, vast, and utterly indifferent intelligence pressing down on our souls. It wasn't a voice. It was a weight. The weight of a billion minds, all thinking the same single, simple thought. Eat. Psychers among us were the first to break completely. They didn't just hear the chittering, they understood it. They saw the galaxy-spanning pattern, the single-minded purpose, and their human minds shattered like glass under a hammer. One of ours, a young librarian named Tyranids, started laughing during a briefing. A high, ragged, insane sound. "Don't you see?" he giggled, tears of blood streaming from his eyes. "Horus and the Emperor, they're arguing over the dinner table. But the food is already crawling away. The food is fighting back. And the real eaters are already at the door." They sedated him. He was found an hour later, his body twisted into an impossible shape, his own force staff driven through his chest. His final words were scrawled on the wall in his own blood. "The shadow has teeth." We were losing on every front. The physical, the psychological, the spiritual. Our world was being digested around us. The very air was thick with spores that made you cough up bloody phlegm. The water was a venomous broth. The forests were now forests of fleshy, pulsating fungal towers that released mind-altering vapors. We were no longer soldiers on a battlefield. We were nutrients in a gut, and the gut was beginning to contract. In the rare moments of quiet, locked in the deepest bunkers, the true horror set in. It was the horror of reflection, of understanding our place in this new, terrible cosmology. My memories of before, they started to feel like a dream. The Imperial truth, the Great Crusade, the Heresy, they were all such small, petty concerns. We were like ants, fighting over a crumb, unaware that the boot was already descending. The Tyranids weren't a faction. They weren't an empire. They were a force of nature, a galactic-scale extinction event. And they had arrived at the one moment in human history when we were perfectly poised to welcome them, with our guard down, our knives in each other's backs. I found myself tempted. Not by the hive mind, not in the way one is tempted by the promises of chaos. This was different. It was the temptation of surrender, the temptation of silence. The hive mind's pressure was immense. It was a psychic scream of endless, pointless hunger. But within my own soul, my own human consciousness, there was also a scream. The scream of grief for fallen brothers. The scream of terror at the endless night. The scream of betrayal, first by Horus, and now, on a far deeper level, by a universe that could spawn such a thing. The hive mind offered an end to my scream. It offered to absorb my tiny, insignificant pain into its vast, incomprehensible whole. To let my individual terror be dissolved in the collective hunger. There would be no more fear, no more doubt, no more memory. Just the simple, clean purpose of the swarm. To consume. To be part of the great digestion. I saw others succumb to this temptation. Not by joining the enemy, but by simply stopping. A guardsman would just lower his lost gun, walk out into the open, and stand there, arms wide, as the gaunts swarmed over him. There was no struggle, just relief. I almost did it. During a retreat through a canyon that had become a river of acidic slime, my squad was cut off. Brother Caius was gone, dissolved by a spray of bioacid. I was alone, my armor compromised, my bolter empty. The chittering was all around me, closing in. The shadow in the warp was a physical force, pushing me down, telling me to stop, to rest. I looked up at the bloated, purple sky, at the living spore clouds drifting like malignant angels. And I felt a profound, soul-crushing loneliness. To die for the Emperor? He was a million light years away, fighting his own war, a war that suddenly seemed so quaint. To die for Gilliman? What was the 500 worlds now but a series of larders? My death would mean nothing. My struggle was a spasm of a dying animal. I closed my eyes. I let the chittering become my world. I welcomed the shadow. And then, I heard it. Not the chittering, not the static, but a voice. A human voice, twisted with static and pain, screaming over the Voxnet. It was a mix of Imperial and Traitor Legion battle cants. All loyalist and traitor elements. This is Captain Latera Saren of the Conqueror. Does anyone read? The orbit is lost. The fleet is, gods, the fleet is being eaten. They're boarding us with living ships. They're in the walls. They're in the transmission dissolved into a shriek of organic noise, and the unmistakable sound of chain teeth on bone. The World Eaters. The Conqueror. Even Angren's flagship was falling. The realization was like a bolt of lightning. It wasn't just us. It was everyone. The heresy was over. It had been superseded. And in that moment, my despair curdled into a new, dark purpose. If we were all to be consumed, loyalist and traitor alike, then our ancient hatreds were the last, pathetic vestige of our individuality. The last truly human thing we had left. I would not surrender my hate. Not to this. With a roar that tore from a place deeper than loyalty, deeper than reason, I surged to my feet, combat knife in hand, and charged the nearest gaunt. I was not an ultramarine fighting for the Imperium. I was a man fighting against the void. And that, I finally understood, was the only war that had ever mattered. The final stand was not at our primary fortress. It was in the geothermal resonator chamber, deep beneath the planet's crust. A place of immense power, where we tapped the world's heart for energy. We were a ragged coalition, a handful of ultramarines, some Death Guard who had become separated from their main force, a few Imperial Army troopers, and a single, silent custodian who had arrived on a mission none of us now understood. The Death Guard. Their resilience was unnerving. The poxes and plagues that wreathed them seemed to even give the hive mind pause. Their corrupted flesh was less palatable. For a time, we fought side by side with these heretics, these monsters. And we were grateful for it. The custodian was named Valerian. His golden armor was scarred and stained with alien ichor. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his voice was a beacon of grim certainty. "They are not a race," he said, as we welded the great blast doors shut. "They are a pattern, a single entity. To fight one tendril is to fight the whole. The shadow in the warp is its mind. Sever the mind, the body will thrash and die." "How?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He looked at me, his eyes ancient and tired. "You cannot. The mind is galactic. We are but a single cell in a body it has decided to consume." It was the most hopeless thing I have ever heard. The hive mind, it seemed, sensed the concentration of energy and biomass in our chamber. The attacks intensified. Not just gaunts now. Larger, more terrifying forms. Warriors that stood twice our height, crushing us with bone swords and scything talons. A lictor that picked us off one by one in the steam-filled vents, a phantom of claws and death. The Death Guard Plague Marine, a hulking brute named Vorks, fought with a grim satisfaction. "See," he rasped, his voice like grinding gravel. "Grandfather's gifts are a fortress they cannot easily breach. Their perfection cannot abide our blessed corruption." But even his fortress was crumbling. A monstrous carnifex battered down our final barricade, and in the chaos, Vorks was impaled on a massive biocannon blast. He didn't die quickly. He laughed, a wet, bubbling sound, as his body dissolved into a slurry of pus and resilient, toxic flesh. The swarm flowed over him, and for a moment, they recoiled, their own tissues melting. But more came. Always more. They simply absorbed the loss and learned. We were pushed back to the central reactor core, a vast well of raw geothermal energy. Valerian the custodian stood before it, his guardian spear a blur of light, holding back the tide almost single-handedly. He was a god of war, a poem of destruction. But every poem has its final line. He fell not to a claw or a tooth, but to a different horror. A psychic creature, a zoanthrope, floated through the wall, its mind a focused lance of the hive mind's will. It did not attack Valerian's body. It attacked his soul. I saw him stagger, his golden armor glowing white-hot as he tried to resist the psychic pressure. The sheer, alien otherness of the hive mind's consciousness, focused into a single point, was too much. He screamed. Not a scream of pain, but of utter, final violation. His magnificent mind, a treasure of human history and purpose, was being unmade, rewritten into a single, screaming note of hunger. He turned his guardian spear on himself, the blade erupting from his chest in a shower of golden light, rather than be consumed. His sacrifice gave us a moment. A single, breathless moment. I stood there, the last one, surrounded by the bodies of brothers and heretics alike. The swarm paused, chittering, watching me. They were not cautious. They were assessing. The zoanthrope floated towards me, its brain-like body pulsating. I felt its mind touch mine. Not to crush it, to show me. And I saw. I saw the great devourer, not as a fleet, but as a single, galaxy-spanning organism. I saw its countless tendrils, each one a swarm like ours, descending upon 1,000,000,000,000 worlds. I saw the Imperium of man, a bright, brief candle of arrogance in the infinite dark. I saw the eye of terror, a festering wound that the hive mind would eventually scour clean. And I saw the final, terrible truth. The Horus Heresy. The fall of the Emperor. The rise of chaos. It was all insignificant. A momentary turbulence in the biosphere. We were not the protagonists of this galaxy's story. We were a temporary resource. A bloom of algae on a pond, waiting for the filter feeders to arrive. The hive mind had no malice. No hatred. No strategy beyond consumption. It was the universe's ultimate, final answer to the question of life. Life that consumes until nothing remains. We were not fighting an enemy. We were fighting a law of physics. The zoanthrope extended a psychic talon, not to kill me, but to absorb me. To take my memories, my experiences, my knowledge of the Imperium, and add it to the great, cold intellect of the hive. To make me a part of it forever. I looked at the geothermal core behind me, a contained star of planetary fury. And I made my choice. I did not die a hero. I did not die a heretic. I did not even die a man. I took one last, deep breath, filling my lungs with the sweet, rotting stench of the hive. I savored it. The last sensation of a living world. Then, I turned and fired my last sidearm charge into the reactor's containment field. The light that followed was not the light of the Emperor. It was not the fire of Prometheum. It was the clean, pure light of a star being born from a world's death. It consumed the swarm. It consumed the zoanthrope. It consumed me. But a part of me, a ghost in the machine, was caught in the psychic backblast. A final, fading echo of Revis, ripped from my dying body and cast adrift on the tides of the warp, or what was left of it. I am that echo. A memory trapped in the static. I float here, in the endless, silent scream of the hive mind's shadow. I see it all now. I see their final victory. I see the last lights of humanity, loyalist and traitor, flicker and go out, one by one. I see the galaxy being stripped bare, rendered down to its base components, until nothing remains but a sterile, dark rock, and the great, sated swarm moving on, into the intergalactic void, to find the next morsel. We thought we were fighting for the soul of mankind. But the universe has no soul. It only has a stomach. And now it digests.